I'm Amanda Plumetot, and this is my story, Cornucopia. A squat grey building of only 34 stories was a roundabout to them. Burra caught a branch leaning through a window and swung past the vines that twisted across its facade. It had cost Burra an arm and a leg to have a daughter. It had cost him his other leg to raise her. She was not a weight to him, though, and he carried her lightly on his shoulders, balanced with his real hand on her ankle. "Here comes another one, Daddy." They both ducked as a shit monkey leapt up past them, trowel held in the tail curving over its back. The monkey rushed, spitting and yowling, raising a cluster of pigeons into the morning's bright heat, and busied itself scooping guano into the panniers on its back. Burra moved his claw to steady Mally and raised his hand over her head to shelter her from the little rain of shit. Sheltering Mally had been his life for the past 5 years. Birds and monkeys were a small annoyance. The biggest danger was other humans. The exploitation of willing flesh was not enough for some. They craved pain and humiliation. He retuned his grip, feeling the curve of her foot safe in his hand. "Watch it! Coming down now!" The monkey brought a small landslide of leaves onto the ruptured cobble of the street. It bounced through the curve of Burra's running hook and dashed away. In the old days he'd raced monkeys. It wasn't legal, but if you paid a man enough. They were more agile than a human, but they lacked stamina and were poor performers in water. He'd done 8 and 10-hour chases through the trees and towers and tanks of the city. He'd run and swung and bounced and clung and swum and leapt and hung until he thought that his tsunami heart would shatter its cage, his cyclone breath would shred his lungs, his earthquake muscles would pull him all apart. Then he would stand on the winner's podium, creating a whole new microclimate as the heat boiled off him and the sweat rained around him, and he would feel the sun and the earth and the stars and the moon and glory in being connected to them all. He was not good enough, though. He was never going to earn his way out of the city. He would have to buy it. Mally's fingers clutched his hair. "Can I have ice cream, Daddy?" Little costs, 1,000 scars. He paid with hair and blood, one last treat for Mally that he allowed himself to enjoy as well. The thrill of cold coconut crystals melted on his tongue. The sweetness of berry syrup was counterpoint to the feelings that he swallowed. Mally was his. She had cost him 3 limbs, and this next meeting would cost him the 4th, but his life was going to change. No more vigilance against freelancing shit monkeys or follicle thieves and vamps waiting to steal away every shed hair and spilled drop of sweat. "Daddy?" "Yes." "Run fast." "You'll drop ice cream on my head." "No, I won't. Run fast." His hooks flexed and he raced, long, loping bounces as easy as moonwalking. He ran through the city with the wind warm in his hair, felt the slight tug and give as she grabbed the ends of trailing vines, heard her call out to friends. There was Lek lolling on a tree branch, weaving hair and beads and brilliant feathers from her slub lorikeet. Fino grinning as he lugged water to his bathhouse. "They going to chop off my legs when I grow up?" "You're not going to grow up, Mally. You'll always be a little girl." "Look, it's raining rainbows." Shredded leaves and petals fell about his face. He laughed. They were coming up hard on the gateway. The guard drew around him like a fist. "Come on, Daddy." Mally knocked him with her feet so that he bounced a little. "Don't stop." "I have to." "But why?" "The guard has to make sure that we're allowed to go on." "Well, tell it. Tell it we can." "Tell it I want to run." "I am telling it." Iris scan, mouth swab, random flesh analysis, 1,000 little scars. Everything had a cost. His right arm hung like a pendulum. The guard whispered an affirmation. Beyond the jungle barrier of the city was the wonder and the majesty and differentness of Metropolis. In his mind, he echoed Mally's awestruck "oh" as they raced along the smooth paving of hard white road. Here were buildings so vast and solid that they cast shadows over the trees. There were no vines twining through the windows. There were no drifts of rotting leaves. He saw people in humming vehicles, their bodies draped and covered. Daddy, they've got clothes. Yeah. You can't even see their arms and legs. It's not just their bums that are covered, is it? Have they got arms and legs? Of course they do, he said. But some of them might have wheels. This is a good road for wheels. He was surprised by the intelligence of her observation. She'd always surprised him. From the moment when she'd first been given to him, still curled and hot from her mother's body, she'd had the ability to show him that there were perspectives he'd never thought of. That was why he'd bought her, he reminded himself as his hooks whipped and sang. She was there so that he could have a different life. Cold air spilled from open doorways and behind facades made of solid glass so he could see bright shine of things that were fresh milled and clean. This is a very special place, isn't it? This is the metropolis. How long do we have to stay here? This is our home now. But there aren't any vines or birds. Well, there also aren't any monkeys that come to steal your shit. And inside the houses, it's clean and dry. Burra stopped at the door of a building with a facade that glimmered like moonlight on water. Transponded introduced him, and the door opened. It was cool. You can hop down now. He lifted Melly from his shoulders but kept her hand in his. They walked side by side through the vast atrium with murals of flowers and trees and birds and insects, each one perfect and none of them any real thing that Burra had ever seen. A door opened and they stepped into a tiny room. Burra whispered, "This room can move." Melly's hand tightened and her eyes went wide as the lift carried them up. "This is like flying." They arrived at Rankin's house. There were soft cushions that Burra wanted to touch, but he knew he would leave a mark, thick and dirty. Rankin was exactly as Burra remembered from 5 years ago. A slender man with dark eyes and sleek cropped hair. He wore pants that covered all the way down his legs, a shirt with fastenings at the front and sleeves that went to his wrists. Burra wondered what it was like, all that cloth surrounding his body. Rankin greeted him with extended hands. Burra clasped his fingers, and it was only after he'd kissed Rankin's knuckles in the formal way and was seeing the smudge of Rankin's exhalation against his claw that he realised he had let go of Mally's hand. She was in Rankin's house now. She belonged to him. "The deeds, then," Rankin said. "Let's get this all over." Burra took the deed from the carry safe in the connecting rod between his claw and elbow. His stomach twisted and knotted in fear, and it embarrassed him that he could feel doubt. He knew all was in order. Mally climbed onto Rankin's chairs as if she was on the big solid branches of their tree. She was not fat incubated or a slub imprinted with synthetic DNA. He'd chosen the finest breeder he could afford and had gene weavers put together the best zygote. He trusted in the health, strength, intelligence, adaptability and endurance of his daughter. "You should see this, Daddy!" Her face pressed against the window. "It's like the box, only we're inside looking out." "Nice mix." Rankin glanced up from the data feed. "She looks good too." "She's perfect." Rankin pointed at the deed. "Even these can be faked." "Maybe." Burra nodded towards Mally. "That can't, though." He'd breastfed her himself. There were always fresh fruit, clean water, abundant vegetables, and he'd fed her protein every single day of her life. He'd seen poor little slubs whose only purpose was to placate the maternal requirements of some feral unfit to breed, their dull eyes and slow wits a foretaste of an eventual fate as servants or sex slaves. He thought of Mally's joy and enthusiasm, her teeth cracking through the carapace of a cockroach, licking the pale cream from its shell, of her by the fire holding a stick with a big spider spitted on it, hardly able to wait, wanting to eat it before it was done crispy with all the hairs singed off its legs. "Yeah," Rankin said, "she's good." There was a hard weight in Burra's stomach. Since the moment he'd fisted himself into a jar and given it to the gene weaver, this had been about buying his freedom. And this was her escape as well. Whatever it was her new owners did, it had to be better than gathering her own excrement to trade for food or weaving the dull feathers of a slub parrot. She had her back to him, the golden ginger of her hair haloed in brightness, hands pressed against the glass, head tipped back, staring up at clouds that floated in a sky as blue as her eyes. He left without saying anything. Burra's wounds healed and the scars itched and tugged at the base of his new arm. His body was light and fast and balanced now. His skin was as clean as the sheets he slept on. His world was cool and empty. He wanted to invite birds and animals into his house. He wanted Mally. He had Rankin's invitation to society. Amberley was the owner of the best team in the world, and Burra had been invited to his daughter's 13th birthday. He'd bought a suit of shining grey with pants that covered his legs to the ankle curve of his hooks and a shirt that had sleeves down to his claws. He wore underwear. The tightness of it around his middle reminded him of his old chasing strip, but it held his cock like a comfortable sling so that he didn't feel that peculiar vulnerability he got from not having thighs. This was Amberley's daughter's formal introduction to society. Burra bought the gift of a snake circlet that reminded him of the snake from his house in the city. The other guests wore suits, black and blue, shimmering gold, pink and grey, just like his. He fitted in. They carried gifts, and some were bigger than his and some were smaller. The women draped their bodies with fabric that clung to their thighs and breasts, so that it made him wonder if they really had the same bodies as the women of the city, or if there was something special under there. They shimmered like lizards in the sun, like the wings of dragonflies. Burra helped himself to a blue drink and followed the signal guide to Rankin. There were other team owners here. He would be introduced to all of them. Servants carried plates of food, toasted cashews and deep-fried locusts, honey cakes and cantaloupe, lychees and creamy widgety grubs, grapes and pistachios. One day this might be Mally. He took a pink drink. This was how box people lived. He swayed and lurched on his blades. The world had become unsteady. Here, Rankin eased him into a seat. Should have warned you about those pink drinks. A white stage lifted Amberley and his daughter. She was blonde and pale, wearing a rainbow dress that danced in tatters and ribbons of colour. Burra felt a sudden, terrible pain in his balls and his guts and his head and his heart, because this was Mally as he would never see her. "Is this real?" he said. There was a flat plain of grass so green and smooth that Burra wanted to roll naked on it. It erupted into a dance of tiny flowers that reflected the rainbow colours of the girl's dress. On Mally's birthdays, they'd sat under the big leaves of the ice cream shop with Lek and Fino and told jokes and stories. He'd carried her on his shoulders around the whole city, leaping across balconies and racing along walls, splashing through water tanks. "Oh, there's more," Rankin said. 13, year of change. She wanted a unicorn. A unicorn? Shh, supposed to be a secret. Bootstrap gene weaving, pathetic slub chimeras patchworked together, dragons that breathed fire once or twice until their lungs burst and they immolated. Would this just be a deformed horse? He was disappointed. Slubs were playthings of fuck addicts and greyhounds and lonely ferals. They lacked dignity. Why would a kid want that? Rankin shook his head and then put his mouth to Burra's ear. They got live matrix. Filthy! Shock and fury erupted out of him, and he wanted to hurl the half glass of pink drink at Amberley. What animal had been broken and peeled and tortured so that a child who didn't care could have a pet that didn't matter? Shh! Rankin waved down Burra's outrage. They used human matrix. He raised a finger. Legal procurement, my friend. The crowd surged as the platform grew a second tier. Doors opened, and the unicorn stepped out. Its horn reflected nacre rainbows, a shimmering pearl of an animal. It saw Burra and, tossing its golden ginger mane, leapt from the stage. It snorted and pawed the ground, and the crowd drew back a little afraid. It gazed up at Burra, eyes blue as mallees. He smoothed its neck with the curve of his claw. The people drew in, and Amberley's daughter squalled with rage. The unicorn nodded at Burra. He got up, unsteady on his hooks. The people pulled aside. Burra tore his shirt and pants away. The sun turned him to gold. He could feel the stars and the jungle and the unicorn and the glorious knowledge that he was connected to them all. He turned and with the unicorn ran towards some distant freedom, bouncing crookedly across rainbow flower meadows, south-southwest, south-southeast, east.